All right, panelists, come on up. Yeah, you can come back up.
Who, me?
Yes, panelists.
I thought get some coffee. And I had
Did our
a
other
clipper.
guest
The clipper.
reverends come in yet? Okay.
So it's yours, man. It's yours. You can talk from up here, or
No, I'm fine right here. Is it still morning?
Watch that.
I want to thank all of the parents who brought the children to the Historical Society here on the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr. It's very important. And Martin Luther King Jr., in my opinion, is one of the most important people in the history of the United States of America.
That's right.
America is the greatest country the world has ever known. It's the most powerful economy, the most powerful military. It still has a long way to go as a nation. But part of the reason why America is such a great nation is that it was really founded by people who on the one hand were very Christian, but on the other hand, they thought that it was their God-given right to enslave people from Africa so that they could make more money. That's really the history of America. And for those of you who are white, you could probably trace your family history back to somewhere else. England, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, any number of, the Eastern Bloc of Europe. But for those of us who are African American, we're lucky if we could go back 3 generations. My great-grandfather was a slave. His father was a slave owner. My great-grandmother, we don't know who she is, who she was. And I'm just saying that as a preface to let you know why, from an African American perspective, it's really been a challenge to be in America. And I want to tie this to Dr. King, because part of the reason why we revere Dr. King today is that Dr. King led a movement that shamed America into treating black people like citizens. As simple as that. The 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendments to the United States Congregation freed slaves. They freed slaves and gave slaves the same, actually, to be honest and more exact, they gave slave men, formerly slave men, all the rights of being white men in America. And it wasn't until the 15th Amendment that women were given the same rights as everybody else in America. But part of the reason why Dr. King is so important is that there were a lot of people before Dr. King who were fighting for freedom. You had Nat Turner, who led a rebellion, 1831. You had Denmark Vesey, who led a rebellion. Denmark Vesey was a freed man, a freed African man who was formerly a slave who bought freedom for himself.
That's right.
He won a lottery, I think $600. He paid for his own freedom. And then he led a slave rebellion. Now both Nat Turner and Denmark Vesey were killed, but they scared the living daylights out of America. And it wasn't until, and there were many other people like that, but it wasn't until Martin Luther King Jr. where he blended together his intellectual studies. He was an intellectual, He was a philosopher, but Dr. King was also a minister. He was a theologian. And what he did was he blended together the Christian theology with the philosophies that he had learned. And what was this major thing that he learned? Basically, that in God's sight, all people are equal. White, black, male, female, boys and girls, everybody is equal. That's where Dr. King started. And then he took the words of Jesus, where Jesus said, "Greater love hath no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends." Well, Dr. King applied that to the civil rights movement. And his application was, if a person is not fit to live, if they haven't found something they are willing to die for. He also, looking back at people like Denmark Vesey and Nat Turner, who got killed leading slave rebellions, he said the question is not about whether or not to meet violence with violence. He said, but you're either nonviolent or non-existent. He said there's no way that black people are going to be free in America if we try to kill those who have oppressed us. We've got to find a better way to work together. And so Dr. King, unlike many of the major voices during the civil rights era, Dr. King pushed for freedom, but through nonviolence. And it's very extraordinary what he did. 63 years ago, we had a march down Woodward Avenue that Dr. King led. Matter of fact, I'm in that march. This is me at 12. Who here is 12 years of age? Do we have any 12-year-olds?
I was 13 and I was there.
Okay, all right. That's my dad, and this is my little brother, who would have been 10. And these people around us are all members of our church. And we joined the march on Alexandrine Street, right down Woodward.
Look behind you.
That's the march. You can't see, but you've got thousands of people. The official estimate is 350,000 people. It looked like 1 million people to me.
Reverend Hood,
Yes.
for those in the audience who may not be familiar, in your own words, describe what the Walk to Freedom was.
Well, the Walk to Freedom was Detroit's version of what was happening in the South. So all throughout the South, where segregation was the law of the land, segregation meant that anything that was public, you had a white version and you had a black version. I was born in New Orleans, 1951. I was born into the segregated South. I went to a segregated school, elementary school, for the first grade. I couldn't go. My parents couldn't take me to the zoo in New Orleans. You may not know this. You saw on the slide, one of the slides that was shown earlier, that the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, was founded in 1957. Guess where it was founded? New Orleans. It was not Atlanta. A lot of people don't know that. And guess who took the minutes for the meeting? My father.
Wow.
Yeah, really. He did. There were 50 predominantly ministers under the leadership of a guy named Reverend A.L. Davis. And it was called the New Orleans Improvement Society, and that they brought Dr. King in, and that's where the SCLC was founded. So when my father came north, my church became a fundraising site for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And, I saw that as a kid. I lived through that.
Yeah, these pictures actually came off the walls in some of the churches that were
Yeah.
part of the movement. That's why they look kind of funny, because they had glass on them. I just tried to take the pictures to show you what was going on.
Yeah, so Dr. King is a very significant person. If you go to DC, how many of you have seen the monument? The statue of Dr. King? One of the most unique things about the statue of Dr. King is Washington, D.C. has a lot of statues of presidents. The only non-president who has a statue, a monument in Washington, D.C. is Martin Luther King Jr. Because here's a guy who died so that we can all enjoy the same rights. So I don't know what else to say. I mean, my father, as I said earlier, was one of the organizers of the March on Detroit. As a child, the way we prepared for the march, some of you may not have heard this, but, we didn't know what it was going to be like because people were getting beat all throughout they were being killed, from marching. Matter of fact, some people were getting killed not for marching, just because, they showed up and had the nerve to try to buy gas from a gas station, or to go in the front door of a restaurant. There were people who were being beaten and killed for that. And so, in our preparation for the March on Detroit, in the basement of the church, the children, primarily children, I don't remember the adults doing this, but they told us if anybody beat you, or if the police start to beat you, the fear was that the police would beat us. They said, get down on the ground, cover your heads, and bend down in a fetal position, like a child. And they said, and just pray, until it's over. Now, thank God, with the March on Detroit, there was no violence, which was amazing to have that many people. But Dr. King created a legacy for all of us. America is a better place because of Dr. King. And I think it's just wonderful that the parents who are here today, you have brought your children to remind them, to educate them as to who Dr. King was, what he really represented, and the movement that he built. Ms. Sexton, I want to thank you for inviting me to be a part.
We have questions for you. Both of you go back up there. In fact, since we have our... waiting that two of our ministers didn't come tomorrow. Would you like to come up and talk about it? Yeah. Okay, we have to share the mic. Okay, so go ahead.
I have a question.
Okay, so
I have a question. This is on?
Yeah, you gotta press and hold it.
I heard that a guy named Reverend Andrew Young, used to come to your church sometimes. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. The adults may know who Andrew Young is, but the children probably don't. Andrew Young was, I forget the office that he held with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, but he was high up with Dr. King. And he was the guy that helped to strategize preparing for the marches. But for most of the marches, he was the guy who would not march. I don't know if you know that. Most of the marches, Dr. King told him, don't march with me because if we get arrested, I need somebody to get us out of jail. And the afternoon when Dr. King was shot in Memphis, Andrew Young is one of the guys on the balcony of the Lorraine Hotel, pointing. But what some people may not know is what happened before they were on the balcony pointing. Before Dr. King got shot, really only an hour or two before he got shot and was killed, Andrew Young had just come back. It was about 4 o'clock that afternoon. He had just come back from being in court. And Dr. King looked at him and he said, here's my little, I can't say what he said. He said, where you been, my little? And Andrew replied, you know where I've been. I've been in court all day trying to make sure we have, the proper papers to go on a march. And Dr. King kept teasing him. And then they had a pillow fight. Grown men.
Right.
They had a pillow fight. And, Abernathy, Jesse Jackson, those that were there, they were like children playing with a pillow fight. And then finally, they all went to their rooms to get dressed for the worship service that night in preparation for a garbage workers' strike there in Memphis. And the next thing they knew, they hear a gunshot and Dr. King's dead. But Andrew Young is from, guess where? New Orleans. And I told you, my father pastored a church in New Orleans. And when my father and mother got married, moved to New Orleans in 1949, the church parsonage was not available. It was under reconstruction. And so a family in the church told them they could live with them until the parsonage was fixed. And guess whose parents they were? Andrew Young. And so when Andrew Young came home from Howard University, he found my father and my mother in his bedroom. But as things turned out, they became good friends, and my father ordained him into the ministry. And the parents of Andrew Young are my godparents. So it's a small, small world. But I had an opportunity to meet several of the people in the inner circle to Dr. King. Hosea Williams, Jesse Jackson. And one of the things that impressed me was that they were just men. They were just men. And there were women in that group as well. And it's amazing to me that it was not a big group of people. Maybe 15 really close people to Dr. King. But like Jesus, Jesus built the Christian church with 12 disciples, and one of them was a traitor. And, it's, I think, the biggest religion worldwide. I mean, it's amazing what can come from a small group of people. And one of the lessons to me in the civil rights movement is that Dr. King showed us that you don't have to have a lot of people to change the world. But you have to have the right cause and the right reason. And so again, I want to commend the parents who've taken time out of your day. You could, have your kids out in the cold at the zoo. But you chose to come to the Historic Museum. Good choice on a cold day. And I hope that some child who's learning a little bit more about Dr. King today will be filled with a sense that it's important to fight for those things that you think are right. It's important to stand up for justice, peace, and equality. In a time when we have a government which is telling us that it's illegal to pursue diversity, inclusiveness, and equity. Those are big words for children. But what it means is it's important just to treat people the same. So I hope that some child who is listening to this program today will be filled with a sense that you want to grow up to be a fair person, to treat everybody like they're somebody. And if you get that one message from Dr. King, then today has been worthwhile.
All right.
Wonderful, wonderful insights, Reverend Hood. And I love that you mentioned the civil rights movement. That brings me to my next question. Detroit is often left out of the narrative of the civil rights movement. We often hear about Chicago, Philadelphia, the South, Washington, D.C., but not much about Detroit. You know, it was a city that was so influential to the movement. So for any of the panelists, what do you all think made Detroit's Black religious landscape influential in the movement compared to other cities?
Hello, everybody. Yes, that's a very important question because, as you stated, Detroit is many times left out of the narrative of the fight for freedom. And Dr. Smith really started his presentation with talking about the fact that churches in Detroit played a pivotal role in that earlier fight for freedom, which we call the abolitionist movement and the Underground Railroad. And so, what he pointed to was that these people are coming from the segregation, in the slave South in the 1800s. They're coming from the slave South. They were opposed and fighting against slavery there, fighting against inequality there, come to Detroit, and they continue that movement for education, that movement for equality in the city of Detroit, and they're helping people escape from slavery. So later, when we get to the Great Migration, when Henry Ford offers $5 a day to all workers in 1914, and thousands of black people start coming to the city of Detroit to get jobs in the auto factory, they're from the segregationist South. So they're coming from a South that many people are forced to share property. Everything is unequal. Schools are unequal, and they're segregated. Where you can sit in a theater is segregated. The lobbies of waiting rooms, everything is segregated, and everything is unequal. It's not just separate, it's separate and unequal. So they're coming from that South, and they're coming here to the city of Detroit. And of course, one of the pivotal institutions that's helping to get them to the city of Detroit are these black churches. Second Baptist, St. Matthew's, Bethel AME. And between the years 1914, Henry Ford offered $5 a day, and 1930, the beginning of the Great Depression, between that, 80 black churches are founded in the city of Detroit, including Plymouth Congregation. It's founded in that time period between 1914 and 1930. Hartford Avenue Baptist Church is the first black church on the west side, founded in that same time period. I'm not gonna go on. There's over 80, almost 80 churches that are founded, about 80 churches that are founded between 1914 and 1930 in that time period. And they're coming from the segregationist South. And just as in the 1800s, you had those churches who were opposed to slavery, and they're gonna bring that anti-slavery movement to the city of Detroit with them. You're gonna have these anti-segregationists, these people who had to deal with Jim Crow. And they're gonna come to the city of Detroit. They're gonna raise money, as you heard, for the Southern Civil Rights Movement, but they're gonna address the inequality that's here in the city of Detroit, the Jim Crow that exists in Detroit, which is housing segregation, school inequality, job discrimination, and police brutality. These are the main forms of segregation and Jim Crow in the North and in the city of Detroit. So you heard about Dr. Sweet, you may know about the Sojourner Truth housing projects, you may know about the 1943 race riot, you may know about the woman who sued to be able to get on the Balboa boat. There's a number of other that you may know about. That there's a wall between Burwood and Mendota on the west side of the city of Detroit. There's all of these kinds of things that black people have to deal with. You may know that there's a walkout in 1966 at Northern High School because of school inequality, and they'll have a freedom school at St. Matthew's. So they're bringing their anti-segregation, the anti-Jim Crow sentiments to the city of Detroit. And on top of that, they're fighting against Jim Crow right here in the city of Detroit. And so that's very important. And the people who are part of the civil rights movement at that time, people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., people like Rosa Parks, people like Bayard Rustin, all of them, if you read their writings, they talk about Detroit. So it's on one end, the fact that Detroit does not get talked about a lot when we talk about the civil rights movement is a sin of omission. People don't know. So they can't teach what they don't know. But sometimes it's a sin of commission. There are people purposely trying to keep the narrative of Detroit out of it. They do not want Detroit to be mentioned. Detroit is more than any other city, the city that brought the labor movement and the civil rights movement together. Not that it didn't exist in other places, but Detroit more than any other city brought those two movements together. The labor movement wasn't always pro-civil rights. It's black people, when they joined the union, who brought civil rights issues into the labor movement. And Detroit played a major role in that. And without that merging, we wouldn't even have a Martin Luther King holiday today. The UAW is the first organization, national organization, to celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And the reason UAW did that is because of the black folks right here in the city of Detroit.
You have a question.
Sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Smith, but can you please tell us who you are?
Yeah,
Because,
I'm sorry.
We didn't.
I'm sorry. My name is Javon Jordan. I am, among other things, I'm the official historian for the city of Detroit.
For those on the panel who have experienced the Walk to Freedom as a child, what do you remember seeing, feeling, or hearing that has stayed with you all these years?
Well, I walked. 1963. What I remember was, as I said earlier, one, the preparation for the march. Now, I don't know if other churches were doing that, but, because my dad had been in the movement, he understood, that it's important that people be prepared to be beaten. That was number one. Number two, it was a enthralling experience because it wasn't just a march. People were singing songs like "Old Freedom, before I be a slave, I be buried in my grave, and go home to my Lord and be free." And you're singing that with hundreds of thousands of people. And to be able to do that, to walk, in our case, from Alexandria Street all the way down to Jefferson, that's a long walk. But frankly, it was, for me being a child, it was like yesterday. It was, the children are just having fun. And that's what we were doing. We were having fun. It was not a violent march. It was a peaceful march. It was and as a child, to try to put into reality, what are we really fighting for? When we say freedom, and one of the expressions of the movement was freedom now. Freedom now. And, freedom from segregation, freedom from injustice, freedom from all the bad things that you can imagine. Mean police. Back then, the police had a special unit called the Big Four. And in our community, we call it the Big Four. But basically, they were white detectives. They wore trench coats, very often had little bitty hats. And they had a reputation for pulling people just off the sidewalk, throwing them up against a car, beating them. And, that's what we grew up with. And so the march was not just about freedom in the South, it was freedom from injustice in Detroit. And it was a very, very exhilarating, exciting experience.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the union, because I said my dad was the president, and he was one of the people who forged the coalition that brought people together, both the union and the freedom movement. But what I remember is what she said, the singing. The singing was incredible. The singing was absolutely incredible coming down, and there were people everywhere. We came out of Willow Street and saw all that. But it was a remarkable experience. To us as kids, King was our president. That was it. And this is something really truly about freedom on there. So that's what I really all that. The other thing, going back to what you said, Jamal, about the importance again of Detroit, is that there's other little subtle things that people don't realize. The money they raised for the Ocean Sweet trial, the churches, they raised so much money, not only they paid for the black attorneys, which is Charles Mahoney and Clarence, but also the major white one, Clarence, they had money left over. They had so much money, they had it left over. And they created what's called the Legal Defense Fund for the NAACP, which took all those folks into trial. That's the stuff. One of the trials, for example, that you talked about was the Arthur McGee fight. They moved into a home on the other side of Tyron, on Detroit on the west side. Said, no, we don't want black folks over here. That's right. And so they tried to kick them out. So they took it to the courts. The court said, nope, you're right, you can't move there. We got restrictive covenants. Took it to the state Supreme Court. They said, nope, still can't move there. Took it to the Supreme Court of the United States. And they said, no, this is America. They struck down restrictive covenants and allowed people to move in different neighborhoods. This is what Detroit did. That's right. It was so powerful. You know, folks came here, they did well, they raised their children, had great schools. School board they elected a black one to the school board. Remus Robinson became the president of all that sort of thing. This is what folks did in Detroit. They had so many people involved in this, with the NAACP at church, we can't even start to name them. You know, all those families that are just totally engaged in this. And they would change leadership every few years. They added in bylaws. And then you'll see new leaders always coming into the NAACP and making it what it is today. So that's just one example of the legal representation. I talked about the medical care. You had Remus Robinson. You also had William Patrick, who was there, and also Bart Morris over at Bethel. They found legal arguments for desegregation in the Hill-Burton Act to allow the schools, the hospitals to have black patients and black doctors. You couldn't go to any of the DMC if you were an African American, but they did that. They changed the legal precedent for that. And that legal precedent changed things in 1963. And in 1 week they had 3 doctors on staff. But what it did around the country, they looked at what happened in the Detroit legal system. And again, all the hospitals around the country began desegregating because of what the precedent they did here in Detroit. Don't ever underestimate the community in which you come from. This is a very powerful community who educated their children, and the next generation will take over after that.
Can I, yes, very well spoken. I just want to share with you one funny story about the aftermath of the March on Detroit that you won't read about in the papers. But as I was telling you, my dad was one of the organizers of the march. And
One more question.
when all was done, Dr. King and the organizers of the march went to a restaurant. They were flying out of the old Willow Run airport. And they went to some steakhouse. And everybody had a T-bone steak. And they're eating their steaks, and one guy got finished before the others, one of the civil rights workers. And according to my father, he said the guy was just looking down wistfully at the little bit of meat that was left on the bone and on his plate. And Dr. King watched him looking down at that bone on the plate. And he said, Dr. King looked at him and started laughing. He said, go ahead, man, pick it up. You're free.
So, you all have pretty much answered all my questions about the march based on your presentations. But for the last question, just to forward look, with the times that we are in, do you think we need another MLK Walk to Freedom movement or moment?
Well, let me start with that. And this is a message I gave yesterday at my church. I'm not going to give you the whole message. But one of the points that I think we can all learn from Dr. King is that kind of like a prize fighter. I used the analogy yesterday of the boxer. That when, I'm not a boxer myself, but I'm kind of fascinated with it. But there's an expression that is used when a fight is near the end, particularly when one fighter is getting the better of the other fighter. I've heard commentators say, this may not look pretty, but what's really happening here is that the guy who's winning is trying to, quote unquote, finish the fight. he's trying to get the fight stopped as soon as he can. One, because he wants to win, but two, you don't want the other person to get hurt. You know, even though the whole nature of fighting is to hurt somebody, but you don't want the person to really get killed or hurt. And so he's trying to literally finish the fight so that the referee will stop it. And part of what Dr. King showed us in the civil rights movement was that he was not just protesting to be protesting. We have to keep that in mind. All the marches, the March on Detroit, the Poor People's March that he didn't live to see, but he organized it. The March on Selma, the March on Montgomery, the March on Birmingham, those were calculated political efforts, social political efforts to bring the nation to its knees, to realize that we needed legislation, laws that would go a lot further than a march. And so what came out of Dr. King's legacy? Number one, the 1964 Civil Rights Act. That's a law of Congress. The 1965 Voting Rights Act. That's a law of Congress. For the children who are here, let me share with you the importance, the significance of a law from Congress. A law from Congress means that it's a law. It's the law of the land. You can't just wipe it out. Now, what we've been watching for the last year from the White House are a bunch of what's called, this is for the parents, you can explain this to your children later, but we've seen a lot of executive orders, where the president has the power, the authority, with a stroke of a pen, to say, you can't, no more diversity, equity, and inclusion. That it's illegal. Well, he's just making that up. But, and he's gone on record as saying he wishes somebody would take out the Voting Rights Act. He said that. But the reason why Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has a statue is because he's the one who gave us the Voting Rights Act. It was the Congress who voted for it. It was President Lyndon Baines Johnson who signed it into law. But it was Dr. King, through the marches, who put the pressure on the nation for a Voting Rights Act. And so, as we think about what are the next steps ahead, it's really all of us should be asking ourselves, how do we finish the fight? Dr. King was a fighter. And it's interesting because here's a guy who didn't hit anybody in the civil rights movement, and he did not advocate fighting. As I said earlier, one of his famous quotes was, it's either nonviolence or non-existence. And so, fighting was not in his mindset, but he wanted to finish the fight. And he finished the fight without a fight. Now, people got killed in the process. People were beaten in the process. But we ended up being more accepted in the United States, at least legally. Some people may not accept us emotionally, but legally, black people had the same rights as white people in America. And that's because of Dr. King. So for the parents who are here today, when you go home and you take your children and you decompress over what you heard today, I hope you will share with them your perspective on this business of the significance of Dr. King really doing much more than a bunch of marches. He really helped to finish the fight toward equality in America.
I'd like to add just one more thing, very, very briefly. When we think about all the struggles that we've been through over the last 250 years, but when this Willoughby went over to Canada and the rules changed, that was by grace. When we look at the 40,000 people who were taking the freedom in this country, it's a lot of people. And that was by grace. we look at what happened down in Selma and Anniston and everything else, and all those student writers were put in jail. The doors in the jails open. That was by grace. Grace works in all sorts of remarkable ways. So we have to keep that in mind all the time in what we're doing. That's what we're here to talk about, the big community. That's all.
Did you want to say
Okay. Well, thank you to our panelists for your insights, and thank you to everyone else for listening. We're going to do a little bit of Q&A.
Oh, they got questions.
You got questions?
What can we do as young people to keep Martin Luther King Jr. His legacy alive?
Well, they also say that there's a guy named Stevie Wonder. There's a guy named Stevie Wonder who made a song. Everybody know that song? Yeah, it came out of Detroit, didn't it? All the kids know that. They can use that as a foundation to get things going. So there's a guy, I had him on a slide here, who had the idea to make this monument come to fruition. He went to school right down the street here off of Woodward. Rod Gillum. That's why there's a monument in Washington you talked about there. So that it comes from educating the children and telling them the stories in that kitchen table. All that stuff you heard about, that I learned about the Underground Railroad, kitchen table. You know, for the mothers and the grandmothers and the aunts and the dads talking that story in the church. Hey, remarkable role, that's all. That's how you do it.
And
I think we have a question from a little person over here.
Happy birthday.
Okay, any other questions? You got another question?
Anybody else have a question? Up there, you got
Good afternoon. So the current administration, I believe, is trying to end MLK Day. How do we stop that from happening?
Real simple. Talk to your legislators. And you may say, well, I don't know my legislator. You can start with a phone call. Every congressperson records the calls that they get. The yeses and the nos. They just want to hear from you. You can write them a letter. But as a non-elected person, that's the start. Start by writing your congresspeople. Frankly, I don't think that's going to go very far. Just like I said a minute ago that the president has said he wants to, get rid of the Voting Rights Act. Martin Luther King's birthday, it's the same thing. It would have to be an act of Congress. And right now, the president doesn't have the votes to do it. He's giving you a lot of bluster, but he really doesn't have the votes. You look at the amount of legislation that was passed last year when the Republican Party had a majority of the House of Representatives, a majority of the United States Senate, and the presidency, and they couldn't get laws passed. What does that tell you? They don't have the votes. And we're getting ready to go into midterm elections, which heavily favor the Democratic Party. And so what I would say, ma'am, is a better day is coming. A better day is coming. And not only is a better day coming, the one thing the United States Supreme Court has done over the last 12 months is they've expanded the authority of the president. Now, those of us who don't agree with the president cringe at that. But guess who's going to benefit from what the United States Supreme Court has done? The next president. And the next president is going to be a lot different than the one we have right now. And so, in politics, you have to really think about what you do because it may come back to bite you. But I think a better day is coming for America. So I encourage you,
To vote.
vote, but don't give up your heart. Because a better day is coming.
And we can't forget that Martin Luther King holiday was introduced to Congress by Congressman John Conyers.
That's right.
In Detroit, right there. So Detroiters do all sorts of remarkable things. They had something called a Congressional Black Caucus. Where did they come from? Detroit. Charles Diggs, one of your persons. Yeah, that's where it came from. So we can do things if we get involved.
I just want to say about Martin King Day, that holidays, particularly King Day, but other holidays, they're created by a community. They're not created by Congress. They're not created by a president. So a president can't remove a holiday that the community created. I want to be clear about that. They can remove it as a federal holiday, and I implore you to do the things that Reverend Hood said to stop that from happening. But if that does happen, that don't stop it from being a holiday that the community celebrates. If they do remove it, Kwanzaa is not a federal holiday. But it's millions of people who celebrate it every year. They don't care what the federal government say. Before King Day was a holiday, there were people who were already celebrating. Black History Month is not a federal holiday, but it's people all over the world, really, who celebrate. And there are even holidays that are part of our community, they're part of the world or the America's community. Mother's Day is not a federal holiday. But can you imagine people not celebrating Mother's Day? All right. So we're not beholden to what the president or Congress does about Martin Luther King Day. We have declared that it's a holiday. And if we declare it's a holiday, it doesn't that much matter what Congress and the president says or does.
Okay, how y'all doing? Good afternoon. It was an interesting question at the very end about, I guess, futuristic thoughts and how we apply some of those tools and skills that Dr. King used to the future, or to our future in particular as young people and young adults. My question would be, in such lawless times, in such violent times, what other strategies and tools can we use from Dr. King's playbook that would be helpful? Like, obviously, working on legislation and things like that. What other tools could help us band together in times that our government, our law, just like then, are not even abiding by laws that are put in place, or legislation that has been pushed by the community? What other tools and skills and tactics could we use from Dr. King's playbook that would give us a push today?
I want to say something real quick, and then I'm going to give it to Reverend Hood. So one of the things that we need when we do a deep study of the civil rights movement, including King's participation in it, is that there's a lot of things happening that you see, there's a lot of things happening that you don't see. So yes, King led marches. That's the public face of these civil rights campaigns. That's the public face of what's going on in Selma. That's the public face of what's going on in Birmingham, is these marches. And in Montgomery, there's a boycott, a bus boycott. That's the public face. But behind the scenes, there are lawyers doing law work. There are doctors going into Selma, including Dr. Charles H. Wright, who goes into Selma to treat the people who've been attacked by these police officers who are beating people on Bloody Sunday. There are people raising funds for people who have gotten arrested and go to jail. There are people raising funds for them. There are people lobbying the Congress and the president to do something and send in troops, send in federal marshals, federalize the National Guard to protect these marches. All these other things are happening that's not public. That's not, you don't see that walking down the street. But all of that is also a part of the movement. All these people who say that marching ain't my thing. I'm a lawyer. And they do that. Marching is not my thing. I'm a doctor. And I'm going to use my medical skills to help this movement. This is what we need to establish. That everybody don't got to be doing the same thing. Black newspapers are writing this and helping to publicize what's going on. Everybody has a part to play. Everybody has something to do. And so when we think about the movement and how successful or unsuccessful it was, understand that today, what we need to be thinking about is what is it that you can do that can contribute to our freedom, our justice, our equality. Because of course we do live in a time where it needs to be a battle. You need to be on the battlefront in some way, and the battlefront is everywhere.
Yes, I want to just add something to the answer to the question that the young lady gave. One of the lessons that we can also learn from Dr. King was the importance of, not just, focusing on the Congress, the president, to change laws, but on a one-to-one level with human beings, to treat people like they're dignified people. Let me give you an example that this is one of the stories Andrew Young told me. He said that when they brought the movement up north to Cleveland, Ohio, that they were, the thing that Dr. King liked to do was to stay in a black-owned motel. He stayed in a black-owned hotel in Cleveland, and they were negotiating, trying to set up marches and all that, and they pulled up one afternoon at a red light in the African American neighborhood, and some of the pimps and prostitutes confronted him at the red light and said, we don't agree with this nonviolence, and you got to make me know it. What is it that's so good about this nonviolence? And they had a big important meeting scheduled that they had to get to. This is in the morning. And Dr. King said, well, look, I'll be back at the hotel at 5 o'clock today. Meet me in the lobby of the hotel and we'll talk. And he said they went on all day with their meetings with these, governmental leaders. But at the end of the day, at 5 o'clock, when they pulled back up into the hotel, they had forgotten that they had told the pimps and the prostitutes to meet them. And the pimps and the prostitutes had filled the hotel lobby. The manager of the hotel was angry. He said, what are you doing? And they said, well, we're here because Dr. King invited us here to your hotel. And so when they got there, they walked into the hotel lobby with, all of these people of the night, the street people who were there. Dr. King sat down with them and he said, is anybody here hungry? And, everybody, is ready to eat. And Dr. King sent somebody from his staff out. He said, go buy me a couple of, gallon jars of pig feet. And that's from the South. And they came back with pig feet, pickled pig feet in the lobby of a hotel. And he sat down and he just treated the people of the night like they were just as dignified as anybody else. As collectively they were eating pig feet. Now, the point that I'm making to the young lady with your question is that all of us on a one-to-one level can start with the message of Dr. King. A one-on-one. It doesn't have to be your congressman, congressperson. It doesn't have to be a senator. It could be your neighbor, somebody you go to school with. To just engage them in dialogue, in conversation, and say, what do you think about diversity, inclusion, and equity? What do you think about migration? What do you think about, ICE raids? And do you think that this is the most human way to deal with people? When you ask them, say, the president is saying that he wants to get rid of birthright citizenship, you know, which is at the 14th Amendment. You know, what do you really think about that? And why do you think the 14th Amendment exists anyway? Particularly for black people, it's for you. It's to ensure in writing, in the law, that black people are entitled to citizenship in America, just like anybody else. And so it's on a one-to-one basis. That's one of the lessons we can learn from Dr. King. People like they're human beings and deal with them on a one-on-one basis. And, you know, great change can come from that.
All right. Well, thank you all for sharing your memories, your scholarship, and your faith with us today. As we continue today's MLK Junior Day celebration, I just invite everyone just to carry these stories forward. You know, history lives when we tell it, when we teach it, and we let it shape how we move in the present. So thank you all for being a part of this conversation.